What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over adding simple crosshairs to our screen. So in our first person shooter tutorial series, we were using the basic crosshairs to this point. And the crosshairs were, I believe they're red by default, and they are just the basic Unreal ones. But you can add your own. You can add them to be weapon specific, you can add them to be dynamic, so when we're moving, they can spread out. Or if you aim down sights, you can actually have crosshairs and reticles in there, depending on the weapon. So there's a lot of things you can do with this, and it all starts with being able to add crosshairs that we can customize. We can also, now that we are going to start adding our real crosshairs, start moving where our bullets are actually firing. Now we have a few ways we can do that as well, and I'll show one of them toward the end of the episode so that your crosshairs can actually line up with the where the bullets are, or rather, the bullets can line up with where the crosshairs say they will be going. Anyway, if you take a look at our other weapons, you can see that the hit scan weapon is right in the center. It always fired out of the center of the screen, and that is where the crosshair is. So this weapon works perfectly fine. Same with aiming down sights. We'll go to the center of the screen. But we can also use another weapon with our crosshair that is projectile based, and it works all the same. Again, it just does not move at all with anything that we are doing. So no matter what, it stays in place, and it's not always completely perfect on where the bullets are going to go. A more advanced crosshair will be covered in another episode, but for now, the crosshairs that we have are good. So let's talk about what we need to do to input your custom crosshairs into the game. Before we do, if you'd like to get caught up in the series, I believe this is episode 27, so if you'd like to get caught up, then here are all the episodes in this playlist right here for everything we've done so far in this tutorial series. We have a very, very long way to go, but with each episode it gets a little bit better, so if you'd like to, see how we got to this point and or follow it in the future, that's how you can do so. Alright, so now to get started, we're going to go to our code and we're going to actually remove the old crosshairs that were in the game. Believe it or not, they were on a C++ HUD. They're not in Blueprint. They were spawned on a first-person shooter tutorial HUD.cpp. So whatever your project name is, mine is FPS tutorial, and then HUD.cpp and .h. You can find them here in your Solution Explorer, and then once you open them up, you will get files that look like this. Now, I did not create these files. These files come with the first-person shooter template, so you will get them automatically by using that template. The only thing I've changed so far is I've edited this bottom line, and I've commented it out. This is what actually draws the reticle or the crosshairs to the screen by default. Now, you could get rid of this entire file. You could repurpose this file using your own images and data. Or you could just disconnect all the logic involving it and calling the function together. Whatever you want to do. For me, I'll probably end up getting rid of these files altogether because I won't need them in the future. But for now, and just for the sake of this episode, I'm just going to comment out the actual draw so that even if the logic is occurring here, the crosshair isn't being created. This will also allow you to always put it back if you ever wanted to. You change your mind in the future. But especially when we get into the dynamic crosshairs, we're not going to need this anymore, so we can get rid of everything in here. Okay, but that's all you have to do in those two files. Now let's go into our FPS tutorial character and set up some of the logic that we want for when our crosshair is going to be visible. I know we don't have it on the screen yet, but we want to set up all the conditions for which it's either going to be hidden or visible. Like when we're aiming down sights, we probably don't want our regular crosshairs to be visible or our blind fire crosshairs to be visible. Same for if we're sprinting or reloading. You can change these though based on your preferences, so just follow along and adjust as needed. So in our base character class, FPS tutorial character, I've added a new function, and I've made it a blueprint implementable event. I've called it set crosshairs visibility. So, you can see the comment there, hides the user's crosshairs when they do not need to be shown. That's true. You'd also say just sets the user's crosshairs visibility. Either way, but basically what happens here is it is a blueprint implementable event. That way we can, edit this on the blueprint character that has a HUD reference. Blueprint callable because we can actually call it from the NMBP in one spot and other places in the future. And then I just set category HUD because that's what it is for. Category is not necessary. It is just a little organizational thing. So up to you if you want to use it. And then this is the actual function. Bool is visible. So if this Boolean is true that gets passed into here, it means we want to make the crosshairs visible so they can be seen to the player. Otherwise, they should be invisible or hidden, which would mean this Boolean would be false. So simply enough, what we're going to do is call this function with the corresponding variable wherever we want it. So let's go to the top, and we're just going to scroll down all the logic and hit things one at a time. So if we go down until we see sprint. When we sprint, we were stopping aiming down sights. And I think that's true. I think we should do that. I don't think you want to be able to sprint while you're aiming down sights. So if you start sprinting, stop aiming down sights. Good. We already did that. But now what we're also going to do is hide the crosshairs. If we can't aim down sights, really when we're sprinting, we're not meant to be using our weapon. Now, some games you can sprint and shoot. So if that's the case, then feel free to not hide your crosshairs here. But since I am going at it with the approach where if you're sprinting, you won't be able to shoot, then we can set the crosshair visibility to be false. The rest of the stuff in this function has not changed. But alternatively, when we stop sprinting, we want to set crosshairs visibility to be true. So when we are done sprinting, we want it to pop back up because now we're ready to shoot again. There could be some time between sprinting, ending sprinting and the character returning to like the idle state or some state where they can actually blind fire or shoot from. That is something we can cover later. We're going to do a lot more work with our blend spaces and animations and make it look right because right now we're using all Mixamo assets and some of it is a little rough, and also on top of it, the timing isn't necessarily finalized. But if you do have animations and you'd like to do that now, all you need to do is have an animation for either when you return to idle or some sort of anim notify on the state machine. And once that notify is called, you can then call this function, set crosshairs visibility, and then set it back to true. That will make it so it's not necessarily instantly calling stop sprinting when you are done with your sprint. But for now, this is good for me, so I'm calling it there and setting crosshairs visibility to be true. Now, zoom in or aim down sights, whatever we want to call it. So we have zoom in, which in the past, it was doing this. It was stopping our sprinting. So yes, if we aim down sights, I want to also stop sprinting. It's the alternative to if you're aiming down sights and you start sprinting, stop aiming down sights. This is the other way. If you're if you're sprinting and you aim down sights, stop sprinting. Okay? Then I was calling the blueprint functions and setting the variable to say we are in the aim down sight state. So this is doing logic on the weapon and the camera to change to the aim down sight state. This is setting a Boolean that can be used in the animation blueprint to trigger the reload animation. And we already had that. What we've added in this function is we're going to hide the crosshairs, set the visibility to be false when we aim down sights. The weapons themselves may have different crosshairs, or you might just have a sight on the weapon, or it might be the iron sights. But either way, we don't need the actual blind fire crosshairs that we have here, so we're setting the crosshairs visibility to be false. Okay, now alternatively, stop zoom, or stop aiming down sights, and going back to blind fire. So here we were calling our function to go back to the regular camera view, return to idle, and now I've added this in the function. So I make sure that the character is not reloading here. Not, that's the exclamation mark, is reloading. And then if they're not reloading, I set the crosshairs visibility to be true. This is because we have multiple cases where we're calling set crosshairs visibility to be true or false, and we want to make sure they're not stepping on each other's toes. If I just set this to be true when we stopped aiming down sights, you could be reloading. You could be aiming down sights, reload, and then your crosshairs would come back to, they would come back on the screen to the HUD. They'd be visible again. And that won't necessarily be right because we don't want it to occur while it's reloading. So just because I go to stop zooming in or stop aiming down sights doesn't mean I am ready for them to be visible. So we have to make sure our other conditions also meet the criteria. So if we're not reloading when we stop aiming down sights, then we want to perform this action. Again, if you want this to be a gradual change, like it takes time to pull the weapon away from the character's body or move their head back, then you don't have to set the crosshairs to be visible right away. You could do this through an anim notify or some other method, however you see fit that makes your game look best. Lastly, we want to cover it for reloading. So for reloading, we want to do it whether we're manually reloading or just reloading because we tried to fire when we were out of bullets. So in this case, I'm going to do this logic in the reload weapon as opposed to in the manual reload, since manual reload will call reload weapon anyway. So in reload weapon, what we were doing before, setting is reloading to true so we could start the animation. We were stopping sprinting from occurring because we're reloading, so we don't want to be able to sprint and reload at the same time. If you do, that's fine, but I don't. And then I was stopping aiming down sights and reloading. I don't want to be able to do that at the same time either. But now I've added this as well, where we hide the crosshairs when we begin reloading. Now, the other functions I have don't involve that function at all to set the crosshair, because you could do it on your specific ability functions or whatever, but that's completely custom and completely up to each individual, so I haven't done anything with that. You could also do it during die and respawn. You won't really be able to see it here because respawning happens instantly here. We don't have any sort of delay or logic to stop the respawn from occurring right away, so you won't really notice it, but for the future, this could be handy. So when you die, I set the crosshair's visibility to be false. Then in respawn, after the character's health has been regenerated and their location has been set, I do set the crosshair's visibility back to be true. So when they're dead, you can't see the crosshair. That makes sense. Nothing else has been changed, but you could, if you wanted to, remove the crosshair when switching weapons. And when the weapon is finished pulling out, when you pull your next weapon out and it's ready to go, you can set it to be visible again. There are tons and tons of ways you can use this. Then if you go into Unreal, make sure you build and compile if needed. Go to your base character BP, and we're going to create our set crosshairs visibility function. So we set all the logic in place. I know we haven't actually added the crosshairs yet to the HUD, but we've set all of our logic up so that everything is working as intended, so that we know when we should be able to see it and when we shouldn't. Now, to finish it up, we're going to need our base character BP and our character HUD. So our character HUD, we're going to add this widget. Really, what I'm doing is I'm adding an image and setting it to the right spot in the screen. Very simple way to do this, and it's actually how it was being done in here, except we're going to do it in the blueprint HUD as opposed to the code. So, if I have an image and I add it to my widget, just drag it in, you can then anchor it to the center, which will then allow you to center it by putting its position at 0, 0 for the X and the Y. Okay? However, that will mean that the origin of this item, the top left of the image, will be at the center, as you can see. So I'm going to delete this box now, and we're going to look at the crosshairs logic. So if I click on this, you can see that I've actually offset this by -30 and -30. Is that just an arbitrary number? Actually, no. So you're going to have a size for your image. When you add your image in here, there's a section called brush. So first things first, if you have an image in your game for your crosshairs, you can go ahead and select it now. I had 2 that I could use. I made these myself. Very simple. But you can use whatever. Doesn't really matter. There's my image. And I decided it was 60 by 60. Since it was that size, I know that half of that height is 30. If you ever anchor something to the center and you want to get it, the center of that object into the center of the screen, then all you do is make sure you subtract half of the size. So half of the X and half of the Y. If I left it at 0, 0, you would see it's actually offset because the top left of this image is in the center of the screen. But if I subtract by half of the X, it's now centered horizontally but not vertically, and then I can take half of the Y to center it both horizontally and vertically. Okay, there's nothing else you have to do here, but feel free to play around with some of the other options. Make your crosshair look better. When we do the dynamic crosshair, we'll actually be making our crosshairs in the widget. Make sure it is a variable, and you can give it a name that you recognize, like simple crosshairs. Then go to your base character BP. It will have a HUD reference. If for whatever reason yours doesn't, or you're just joining in for this episode in the series, here's how I get my HUD reference. In my begin play for my character BP, I create a HUD widget. This is because the HUD will only ever be seen by the owning user. If we go down to spectators and stuff down the line, we can replicate it, but it will still be only really controlled by this one player. So it's perfectly fine to spawn it when the character spawns. So we create our character HUD widget, and then we just set a reference to it. All right, and that's something we did a long time ago in the series, but that's just a reminder. Now what we need to do is grab our event that we made. Remember, we made the event in the code called set crosshairs visibility. So we need to search for it, and it will come out like this. Click this, and you'll get this node. Then the logic here is really simple. We need to make sure that the HUD is valid before doing this, otherwise we will get an error. So just get your HUD reference, convert to validated get, drag off of it, grab your simple crosshairs, or whatever you called your crosshairs right now. Drag off is visible into a branch, just like this. Only if the HUD is valid, do this logic. And then lastly, you just have to do these last 2 nodes, which are set visibility. So drag off of simple crosshairs and call set visibility. And you only want this image to be visible if it's true that this event is getting the true Boolean. Otherwise, it should be false, so hidden. All right, and that'll do the actual hiding and making visible. Now, the last thing you may want to do is fix up the crosshairs when reloading, because currently we don't have a way to tell in the code when a reload has finished. But we do in our anim BP. We have this reload animation. We have an event that gets called when reload transitions back to idle, or really when it exits the state in general. And so once we start going back from reload, we know that the reload is finished. That's the only way we can actually exit reload. And because of that, when this anim notify gets called, what we were doing was setting reload back to false. But now we're going to add an additional check. We're going to confirm that the character is not sprinting before doing this, and then we're going to set the crosshairs visibility to go back to true when the reload is finished. We already have our character reference here from the reload, so I brought it over. Just checked is sprinting, because I don't want to be able to see my crosshairs when I'm sprinting. Brought it into a branch, and only if it's false, we're not sprinting, then we set the crosshairs to be visible. Make this even neater, and there you go. And now you're good to go. This is everything you need to do to be able to see your crosshairs and make them visible in the game. You can see how it disappears when it should. Aiming down sights, reloading, sprinting, and all that good stuff. So now our reticle is functioning as intended. The only thing you may want to do is fix up some of your positions of your bullets now that you're getting custom crosshairs in. So you can see the blaster shoots exceptionally low. Now to fix that, you can actually just simply go into the character and rotate the socket. So I like to click on the character and double click on the skeletal mesh. Play a specific animation, usually the aiming animation. That way I kind of know what I'm working with. And then you go to the socket of the weapon or item that doesn't look right. Mine's weapon socket. And you can do something like tilt it up. Now you may want to adjust your snapping value because it's pretty high by default. I think it's 5 by default, which can make a big difference. I like to make it the smallest, but even then it's usually too big. I'll show you another method here after we test this one. That looks a lot better, right? So maybe I want it to go a little bit to the left though, because it looks like my bullet is a little bit to the right of my reticle or my crosshairs. So if I try and do a full rotation here, like if it needs to go to the left and I do even one click, it's probably going to be too far to the left. And you can see that it is. So what you can do now is, first of all, I'll put it back. That's where it was. You can actually click this little, like, you see this somewhat transparent grid where my mouse is? You can actually select that and manually move it. So what we can do is get into where it will help our view. Like right here, I know at the moment I am shooting down below and a little bit to the right. And so now I can move this to where it will go to the left. So move it a little bit more this way. And that was way too much. Something like that might work. And that's pretty good. I could make it better, but for the purposes of this video, I won't drag it out. But yeah, you can edit it and then you can make it shoot much, much closer to your crosshairs. Now there are other ways of cleaning this up in the future, so don't think it's the only way. We're also going to introduce things like spread patterns, which are going to kind of, you know, blow everything up, and we're going to have to manually account for that and how our crosshairs look. But this is a good start. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge, huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for continuing to support me. I love working on these videos, and I'm glad you enjoy them as well. They're always so fun. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free. I'd be happy to help you with any of the problems you had. Anyway, like I said, guys, I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.